Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the Bald Eagle Podcast. I am Shawn Cressman. I am the Bald Eagle. No entry music this time. Couldn't find one that I liked, and I got all these copyright infringements from places like Syria and other places. So I figured I'd avoid those this time, and we don't have any intro music. But this is the Bald Eagle Podcast. It is our playoff edition. Generally speaking, the Bald Eagle Podcast is 100% Philadelphia Eagles. But of course, they are not playing anymore, and I am also an NFL fan. I'm assuming you are too. So I like to keep everybody up to date with everything that's going on in the playoffs as well. And this week we had the divisional round, so we'll get to that in a moment. The first thing I like to talk about, and I skipped over two of them last week, are my three rules. So my podcast has three pretty simple rules, but they're important to me, and hopefully you find some value in them as well. The first one is no politics, 100% no politics. We don't talk about that in either direction or even down the middle. Doesn't come up. The occasion that we might talk about politics, and when I say talk about, I mean we talk about how it's impacted the game, and the total extent of that was that we did discuss earlier on in the season the instances where fans were allowed back into stadiums, or when fans were not allowed at all. So that was the extent of politics. We avoid that here purposefully. I don't also talk about rule number two is I don't really talk about the players' personal lives. I don't find that at all interesting. I usually tune out when NFL on Fox, their pregame show, turns to a player and starts to ask him questions about things that have nothing to do with football. Frankly, most of the time when the players answer questions about football, they're generally not, especially after the game, they're generally not very intelligent conversations. So I just avoid that stuff completely. You'll never hear about any of the things that people do in their personal lives, unless, of course, it impacts the game. And then lastly, I'm not censored. This isn't a kids channel on YouTube, any of that stuff. So I am not censored. So things to keep an eye on when you're paying attention to the Bald Eagle Podcast. All right. So the Bald Eagle Podcast countdown. So we have 4 days until the championship games. Today is Wednesday. 2 games, same day, Sunday, which is nice for everybody, hopefully. At 3:05, the number 5 seed Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be at Green Bay. Green Bay is the number 1 seed, and that is on Fox. And then at 6:40 p.m., the number 2 seed Bills are at the number 1 seed Chiefs on CBS. So let's get to some game highlights. Let's figure out how this all started. So it's not necessarily in order, but the first game I'm going to talk about is the number 6 seed Cleveland Browns at the number 1 seed Kansas City Chiefs. Pretty good game overall, I think. I think generally speaking, it was very similar in some aspects to the Colts Bills game, where a handful of mistakes could have changed the game completely. When I talk about the Colts Bills game, there was a play, I think in the middle or so of the second quarter, where Philip Rivers just slightly overthrows a guy in the end zone, and that touchdown, assuming everything else is exactly the same in the game, would have been the difference, would be the game changer. Similar things happened in this game. So there's about 1 minute and 36 seconds left in the first half, and Mayfield throws a strike to Higgins, who leaps in the end zone. We all remember this play. To me, it seems one of the more disappointing ways to turn the ball over. But great pass to Higgins. He leaps to score a touchdown into the end zone, but he fumbles the ball right before the ball breaks the plane of the end zone. And it doesn't go out of bounds. It goes into the end zone and then goes out of bounds. So they were inches away from 7 points, and instead they now they give the ball to Kansas City as a touchback. Kansas City gets it on their 20. So there's 7 points there that was left. And in fact, assuming again that everything else is the same, that touchdown would mean that the final score is 24-22 in favor of the Browns. Pretty shocking. Now, again, who knows what would have changed in the game if that had been completed, if that would have been a touchdown and not returned. So if you just add that touchdown, Cleveland wins the game. The other thing is that when you think about these games, momentum has a big play in them. And after that fumble touchback, Kansas City then marched down the field and kicked a field goal. So that turned out to be a 10-point swing. They would have gotten 7, and instead they lost 3. The other team got 3. Assuming that not everything else is the same, in theory, that touchdown by the Browns could have perhaps created some momentum for the Browns, made their defense a little more excited. And then when Kansas City did get the ball on the ensuing kickoff, perhaps they can't drive down the field and score a field goal. Perhaps, the game changes in a more meaningful manner. Who knows? But again, one throw could have changed the whole game, but again was missed. In a game where most NFL fans probably expected Cleveland to run often and to try and control the clock running the ball, Kansas City actually outran them. Kansas City had 123 rushing yards and Cleveland only had 112. And now, of course, Kansas City went up early at halftime. They were winning 19-3. So Cleveland had to play catch up, and we all know that when you play catch up, you got to throw more often. It's easier to score more quickly throwing the ball. Other than the rushing yards, most stats the rushing yards weren't too different. 123 to 112, not a significant difference. Surprising because we thought Cleveland would have the advantage, but all the other stats are generally very similar as far as first downs and plays and all that stuff. The big outlier was the passing yards. Kansas City had over 120 more passing yards, and I think that that was probably the deal breaker or the stat that really pushed them over the edge. We all remember too that Patrick Mahomes got a concussion with 7 minutes and 27 seconds left in the third quarter, so about halfway through the third quarter. From what I'm reading, he apparently has passed some concussion protocols that mean big changes or big things that he passed that are very positive. So it seems like the odds are in favor of him playing the championship game, but no guarantees. And concussions are. For all we know, he could go to the neurologist. Yes, one of the things he has to do to get cleared to play is to go to an independent neurologist. And for all we know, that person, could not be a football fan or just do his job, I guess, would be more the better way to say it. So even though he only played 2.5 quarters, he was 21 for 30 for completing 70% of his passes, 255 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, wasn't sacked. Excellent quarterback rating of 106.9. So Mahomes had a great game up until he got his concussion. And surprisingly, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I didn't think that the hit was that significant. I don't think that he got hit that hard. Perhaps it was the angle. It looked more of like a neck thing to me, and I have seen some reports that was part of it. But anyway, hopefully he'll make it back, because I think it would be Kansas City has had success, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if they didn't make it to and or win the Super Bowl. But it would be disappointing for them to lose like that, where one of their starters is injured. Otherwise, they most likely the game. His Mahomes playing is a significant impact on the game both ways. So it'd be disappointing, I would think, for him to go out like that. So Chad Henne is their backup. Probably he was sufficient in his backup duties, and I say sufficient because he didn't lose the game. He threw 8 passes. He completed 6 of them. That's 75%. He only threw for 66 yards, did not have a touchdown, did have 1 interception, did get sacked once for a 6-yard loss. His quarterback rating wasn't very good. It was 59.4. But he didn't lose, and that's all he needed to do against the Browns. He didn't lose. So in my opinion, I don't think Kansas City can beat Buffalo with Chad Henne by any means. I think Buffalo probably has a field day with the Chiefs if Mahomes is not a quarterback. So other stats from the Chiefs players. Darrell Williams was their leading rusher. He had 13 rushes for 78 yards. That's a 6-yard per carry average, which is good. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. I talked about Travis Kelce a little bit. Well, both of them I talked about. I focused a little bit more on Kelce because of the Browns' past failures at covering tight ends. And of course, was the second leading receiver, so of course the number 1 tight end. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce both had 8 receptions. Tyreek Hill had 110 yards receiving, so that's an average of 13.8. Kelce had 109 yards receiving on those 8 catches, so 13.6 average. However, Kelce did have a touchdown, so I would say that Kelce probably had a better game. But they both had Kansas City had 2 100-yard receivers. Cleveland, on the other hand, Mayfield actually had a pretty decent game. It wasn't a horrible game, and it wasn't a great game. It was I'd say average, slightly below average. He was 23 for 37. That was 62% of his passes. That's okay. He completed that for 204 yards. He had 1 touchdown. He did have an interception. Was sacked once for 8 yards for an 8-yard loss, and so his quarterback rating was 74.3. 6. So about average. What's going on, Ryan Reese? Thanks for listening. I appreciate the comment. So he didn't do horribly, but he didn't do well enough to win. And then Chubb, again, in my opinion, a surprise. I expected the Browns to run more often and try and control the clock. Chubb only had 13 rushes for 69 yards. That's a 5.3 average, which is good. And then Cleveland's top receiver was Rashard Higgins, the guy who fumbled the ball into the end zone for a touchback. He had 5 receptions for 88 yards, and he averaged about 17.6 yards per reception. So, honestly, I would think, in my opinion, as a Browns fan, I would hope anyway, you're probably still happy with the way things turned out. You weren't too far off with beating the Chiefs, admittedly without Mahomes, but you weren't too far off to making it to the AFC Championship game. So that's pretty exciting. And I feel like the Browns will most likely be about as good, if not slightly better next year. Hopefully, for their sake, maybe Mayfield matures slightly better and is able to throw the ball a little bit more accurately or a little more successfully. So the next AFC matchup we have is the number 5 Baltimore Ravens up against number 2, the Buffalo Bills. And of course, the Bills won this game 17-3. Really close defensive game. Second game that the starting quarterback for one of the teams got a concussion. This time it was Lamar Jackson. This time, though, I don't know that it made a significant difference in the game, and we're only basing that off of his performance up until the concussion. If you base that off his performance, well, I would say if you base it off his performance over the whole year, perhaps that's not necessarily the truth. But he has been declining over the last 3 games, and we'll talk about that. But similarly to the earlier game, the AFC game, this game was filled with missed opportunities by the Ravens. The biggest one was the interception that Jackson throws in the end zone. Apparently, his first interception in the red zone, first interception in the red zone, and it was essentially a 14-point swing. Of course, they were in the red zone, and let's assume they were going to score a touchdown because hopefully they would have. Instead, they was intercepted in the end zone, and I didn't write down who caught it. The corner that intercepted him ran 101 yards for a touchdown, which is, I believe, a playoff record for an interception return touchdown. So that was a 14-point swing. So you figure if Baltimore, the final score was 17-3 in favor of the Bills. If they don't throw that interception and he doesn't return it for a touchdown, now Buffalo only has 10 points. And if Baltimore ends up scoring with that drive, Baltimore has 10 points. So that one play, again, assuming everything else is the same, was the play that changed the game. And thank you, Ryan Reese. Teron Johnson was the corner that intercepted that pass and ran it back. So big play, and again, a mistake if avoided could have had a meaningful impact on the game. So I mentioned that Jackson left the game in the third quarter. He left right as the third quarter ended. He had a concussion, so their backup Huntley came in. And he played all right. He made a couple of mistakes that also could have changed the game. In the fourth quarter, with about 6.5 minutes left, misses a wide open receiver, had beaten all the men, and if this guy catches the ball, easily a touchdown. So there's a misplay right there. And then lastly, with about a little bit more than 2.5 minutes left in the game, Huntley throws another ball into the end zone, and their tight end, Mark Andrews, had both hands on it. But just was unable to bring it down. I don't necessarily think that's a mistake, but had Mark Andrews been able to catch the ball, had he been able to hold on to it, there's a touchdown there. And if Huntley throws a slightly more accurate ball, there's 2 more scores. So now we're, assuming that the interception continues, now we have a tie game. So, we always talk about, well, it's always said anyway, that the NFL is a game of inches. So here's some perfect examples. Primarily that interception. If it's slightly more accurate or slightly even more less accurate and isn't able to be caught, perhaps the Ravens win the game. Perhaps they score a touchdown and Buffalo doesn't, or it's tied. So very meaningful mistakes in the game. If you look at team stats, the majority of them are similar. The one outlier is the rushing yard comparison, which we all expected. The Ravens had 150 rushing yards and Buffalo only had 32. Lamar Jackson, I spoke about him and how he could have perhaps played if he had continued to play like he did in the regular season. However, he's been declining over the last 3 games. If you look I didn't look at every single stat in detail, but his quarterback rating has declined from, I think it was in the 90s, the wild card weekend. It was then in the 70s. And now I think this past week, it was in the 60s. So he has steadily declined each playoff game. Now, who knows if he would have turned that around, assuming that he got to play the fourth quarter, but we'll never know that. It's also the second game in a row that he has not thrown a touchdown, but has thrown an interception. So perhaps a trend. I am not a strong fan of his type of a running quarterback. I like quarterbacks that are mobile, that can move around in the pocket. Jalen Hurts was a great example. He was able to shuffle around and move around the pocket and be mobile. But Lamar Jackson oftentimes looks to run primarily, and that's just the way he plays his game. But I feel like, and at least so far, it has stood up to the test of time. If a quarterback runs primarily and isn't accurate passing, they generally don't have success in the NFL, or at least not Super Bowl type or long-term success. So it's going to be interesting. I know that generally speaking, I think for the season, his quarterback rating was upwards of 94, 95. So he is generally more accurate. I think career he has roughly 68 touchdowns and maybe only 18 interceptions. So he's generally more accurate. This was his first interception in the end zone. So perhaps he's able to throw the ball more successfully if people are beginning to catch up and stop him on the run. We'll see. For the 3 quarters that he played, Lamar Jackson was 14 for 24, as a 58.3% completion percentage, which is poor. He only had 162 yards. I mentioned he didn't have any touchdown throws. He did have 1 interception. He was also sacked 3 times and lost 24 yards. His final rating was 61.5, again, completing a playoff decline. He only had 9 rushes for 34 yards, which is a 3.8 average, which, a 3.8 average for a running back would be about average. It would be mediocre. But for a quarterback, generally speaking, especially a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, he should be averaging, upwards of 6-7 yards per carry. Otherwise, he's running at the wrong time. Their leading rusher for the Ravens they actually tied. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins both had 10 rushes for 42 yards, which is an average of 4.2 per carry. So they both had exactly the same stats. And then the leading receiver was Marquise Brown. He had 4 receptions for 87 yards. That's a 21.8 average. Buffalo, on the other hand, didn't make a lot of mistakes. No interceptions. They played a little bit more consistently. Josh Allen was 23 for 37, so 62% of his passes he completed, which is about average. 206 yards. He did throw 1 touchdown, but no interceptions. He was sacked twice and lost 18 yards for those, and his quarterback rating was 86.1, which is low for him. Not bad in general, but low for Josh Allen. I think last week he had the highest quarterback rating out of all quarterbacks, so not quite the same game. And it was primarily his defense that we mentioned, the touchdown or the interception return for a touchdown. It was the defense that was able to win the game for them. They were able, again, to limit Lamar Jackson to 34 yards on 9 rushes through 3 quarters. I think is a win. And my opinion is that if they continue that game with Lamar Jackson, I don't think the results change. So then we bring up the AFC Championship game on CBS. It is 6:40 p.m. and it is the number 2 Buffalo Bills against the number 1 Kansas City Chiefs. So in both championship games, I think weather is going to play a part. In Kansas City, the temperature, the high is 44, the low is 31, and there's like a 45% chance of rain. I didn't see any significant wind. But the rain and the fact that it's played on a natural grass stadium might affect footing. And in fact, I believe that I've read that the Arrowhead Stadium is one of the poorest stadiums as far as footing is concerned on the grass. So hopefully they get things tightened up, and hopefully it's not a concern. But that would lend, if it's real slippery, it might actually benefit it could benefit the running game, and it could benefit the passing game. So, but we'll see. Now, Mahomes did, as we mentioned, he did hit his head. It didn't seem significant, but he was. I mean, if you saw the game, he stood up and was a little wobbly. He did participate in a light practice. Is still part of the concussion protocol. But again, I mentioned earlier that he has taken what people have said, "quote unquote," big steps towards playing against the Bills. And generally speaking, the expectation is that he will play. I don't even think that odds have changed because I think they assume that he will play. I would imagine that if Mahomes was not going to play, the odds would be significantly different. And so to summarize, the game preview, I think it really all comes down to if Patrick Mahomes plays. If he plays, I think the Chiefs most likely win. But if he doesn't, I think the Bills have a pretty easy win against Chad Henne. Now, if Mahomes plays and it becomes a shootout, I don't necessarily know which team would win that fight, because the Bills have been successful at putting up points. They've averaged about 34.7 points per game since week 9 of the regular season. So they're able to put up points. Stephon Diggs is a great receiver. Josh Allen's been playing really well. Singletary has been really Singletary has been doing well as a running back and a receiver out of the backfield. So they have the ability for those plays, and I think they could easily keep up with Kansas City if it becomes a shootout. Some interesting stats. The Chiefs are hosting a championship game for the 3rd time in a row. The only other team that's ever done that was the Philadelphia Eagles from 2002 through 2004. At least that's the longest streak in the Super Bowl era. The Bills, the last time they were in a championship game was 1993. And back in 1993, it was their 4th consecutive trip to the AFC Championship game, which led to their 4th consecutive trip to the Super Bowl, and also their 4th consecutive Super Bowl loss. Only team to ever make it to the Super Bowl 4 times in a row. Only team to ever make it lose every. Other teams have probably lost all their Super Bowls, but only team to go 4 times in a row and lose all 4. The spread on this game is the Chiefs are giving away 3, and the over/under is 54. Again, if there's more evidence that Mahomes isn't going to play, odds are those odds. I expect those odds to change, and I would expect them to change into the Bills' favor. Okay, so we had 2 more games in the NFC this weekend. The number 6 Rams went to Green Bay and played the number 1 seeded Packers. Packers ended up winning 32-18. Essentially, Rodgers was too much for the Rams defense to hold. In fact, not just Rodgers, but the whole Green Bay offense just overwhelmed the Rams. They dominated almost every statistic. They had 28 first downs as compared to the Rams 17. They ran 72 plays. The Rams ran 50. They had almost twice as many yards, 484 to 244. They had exactly twice as many passing yards, 296 to 148, and a hair less than twice as many rushing yards, 188 to 96. And then time of possession, the Packers had it 36 minutes and 12 seconds, while the Rams only had it 23 minutes and 48 seconds. So essentially dominated almost every statistic out there. Rodgers was very good, like he normally is. He was 23 for 36 at 63.9% completion percentage. He threw for 296 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 0 sacks. His quarterback rating was 108.1. So that Rams defense that is supposed to be good wasn't even able to sack Aaron Rodgers 1 time. So their offense was just too much. Aaron Jones had 14 rushes for 99 yards, 7.1 average, and did score a touchdown. Allen Lazard was their top receiver, 4 receptions, 96 yards, which is a 24-yard average, and he did score 1 touchdown. So hopefully that's the offense that shows up in the NFC Championship. I believe it will be. And hopefully that's the offense that shows up in the Super Bowl if they make it. Goff didn't have a bad game, statistically pretty good, actually. He just didn't throw the ball downfield very often, all short throws. And the Packers defense really stepped it up, especially at the end of the game. The last 2 drives by the Rams, the second to last one, there was a big sack on 2nd down, bringing up 3rd and 13 or 16 or something. And that meant that, and the Rams weren't able to overcome that. And then the last drive that the Rams had the ball was stopped on 3rd down by a 4-yard loss sack. So their defense really stiffened up right there at the end, and I think handed them the game or was able to secure the game for them. Goff, I mentioned, wasn't very bad. His stats, statistically, he did pretty well. He was 21 for 27. That means he completed 77.8% of his passes, which is excellent. But he only threw for 174 yards. So 21 passes, 174 yards. You're averaging, under 9 yards a pass. That's low. He did have a touchdown, didn't have any interceptions. His quarterback rating was 105.9, which is good. He was sacked 4 times for a 26-yard loss. So not a bad game for Goff. Now, I don't know if part of the reason that he didn't throw the ball so as deep as he should have was because of his thumb. I don't recall hearing about how it felt or how painful it was. I know he wore a glove, which he's done in the past, but that could be why he didn't throw the ball downfield as often as he needed to. Cam Akers was their leading receiver. He had 18 rushes for 90 yards. That's a 5-yard per carry average, and he did have 1 touchdown. And then their top receiver was Josh Reynolds. He had 3 receptions for 65 yards, which is an average of 21.7. So good game. Packers essentially dominated with their offense and won and moved to the NFC Championship. So now comes what I think was probably the most interesting game this weekend: the number 5 Buccaneers at the number 2 Saints. We all know the Bucs won 30-20, right? The Bucs were the only team, I believe. Well, yeah, the only team. They were the only team this weekend that beat a higher seed. They were seeded 5th, and they beat the number 2 seed Saints. The AFC Championship is number 1 against number 2, so they won all their games. So the first time this season, anyway, that a lower seed beat a higher seed. Now, this game featured 2 of the NFL's most accomplished and 2 of the NFL's oldest quarterbacks, and ironically, the poor quarterback play was a key factor in this game. Both quarterbacks completed less than 56% of their passes, which is low. The average, I would say a good average in the NFL is to complete 60% of your passes or better. Anything below 60 is just poor. Neither quarterback threw for 200 or more yards. They both threw for less than 200 yards. Breeze had 3 interceptions, and Brady should have had 1. There was one that was easily intercepted by one of the Saints corners, but he just didn't get his feet in bounds. So he was out of bounds. He didn't catch it. So surprisingly, the game was marred with poor quarterback play. And I mentioned that Drew Brees was, I mentioned earlier that both of them completed less than 56% of their passes. For Drew Brees, that's horrible. Drew Brees has, I believe, the NFL single season record for completion percentage. And he's consistently been, middle to high 60s and oftentimes in his 70s. So for him to throw, he was 19 for 34, which is 55.9%. So poor game by Drew Brees. Only 134 yards, got to be a career low or very close to it. 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. He didn't get sacked, so that's the one redeeming quality. But sacks don't go into the quarterback rating, which he had 38.1. I think that's by far the worst showing by a quarterback in the playoffs this year. So he did not go out with a bang at all. Kind of went out proving that perhaps he should have retired. Kamara had 18 rushes for 85 yards, 4.7 average. That's pretty decent. And Traquan Smith was their top receiver with 3 receptions for 85 yards. He had a 28.3 average and 2 touchdowns. Traquan Smith is the receiver that caught the deep ball from Jameis Winston. So Winston came in and they had that trick play, and he threw I think a 56-yard touchdown. And that's what made the game even more competitive, is that they were able to score that touchdown early. When you think about Tom Brady, again, arguably one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game, which is becoming more evident now that as he left, he left New England, they've suffered, and he went to Tampa Bay, and they've benefited from his presence. But he didn't have a very good game either. Better than Breeze, but not a typical Tom Brady game. He completed 18 of his passes. He attempted 34, so that means he only completed 54.5% of his passes, which is low. He only had 199 yards, so less than 200 yards passing. He did have 2 touchdowns, and his rating was pretty good, 92.9. And he did have 1 sack, and there was a 10-yard loss with that sack. But again, not Brady level, a Brady level game. So, thinking about the next game, hopefully he's able to improve his play, because I think I think we can all agree that Tampa Bay and Green Bay is going to be uphill sledding for Tampa Bay. Fournette was their top rusher. He had 17 rushes for 63 yards. That's 3.7 average. He was also their second receiver by yards. He had 5 receptions for 44 yards, 8.8 average and 1 touchdown. So Fournette was a meaningful part of the game. The number one receiver as far as yards was Cameron Brate. He had 4 receptions for 50 yards at a 12.5 yard average per reception. So, so again, ugly game specifically by the quarterbacks. If Tom Brady plays like this in the NFC Championship, they won't win. So in the NFC Championship, we have number 5 Tampa Bay at number 1 Green Bay. I mentioned the weather in the Kansas City game. Weather is going to probably be even more of an impact on the game in Green Bay. The high on Sunday is 28. The low is 18. There's a 45% chance of snow. Now, they said snow showers, but snow is snow. That's also a natural grass turf. So with the snow and the moisture, perhaps that has an impact on footing as well. Some stats that we all might be familiar with as Eagle fans is that Tampa Bay is 1-17 all time in weather that is 32 degrees or less. Anybody that's listening have any idea who they beat that one time when the weather was 32 degrees or less? It was the old Philadelphia Eagles, 2002. They came into Philadelphia for the NFC Championship game, and they beat us in weather that was below 32 degrees. In fact, that was the headline, that they were 0 and I don't know at the time if it was 0-17, but they were 0 and whatever in games that were 32 and less, and they finally got their first win. So, historically speaking, the deck is stacked against the deck is stacked against them. Aaron Rodgers is 29-5 at home in December and January. So you figure when is his stadium the coldest? December and January, and he's 29-5 in his career. So he's accustomed to playing in the snow. In addition, now as far as Tampa Bay is concerned, there's some motivation. Well, of course they want to make the Super Bowl, but Tampa Bay, if they're able to beat the Packers, they can become the first team in NFL history to play a Super Bowl in their home stadium. They've also been really good on the road this year. In regular postseason, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 8-2 away, and they've won their last 7 away games. So Tampa Bay has some momentum as far as its current team, but history is not in their favor. In my opinion, I think that I don't think that Tampa Bay can match Green Bay throw for throw. I don't think that the Bucs can keep up with the Packers offense. So the only way that the Tampa Bay has a shot at this is if they can somehow force turnovers. I think that's the only way that the Tampa Bay wins. They're going to need to force turnovers, and I think that's going to be difficult because Aaron Rodgers doesn't turn the ball over. So in my opinion, I think Green Bay wins this game. I think they win. I don't know. I'd say not real convincingly, but I think it's a. I don't know that there's ever a concern that they're going to lose. I think Aaron Rodgers will be on the top of his game. Maybe Brady will be too, but I don't know that he can keep up. And if you think about Green Bay and their defense, they've been successful with turnovers in the past. If they can cause 2 turnovers, which I don't think is unheard of, especially if they can fluster Brady and all that. Tampa Bay is 1-4 when they have 2 or more turnovers. So, some things to think about. My opinion, final score, I think Green Bay is going to win 37-27. According to the odds makers, Green Bay is giving away 3.5 points, and the over/under is 51. I forgot my pick for the Kansas City Buffalo game. If Mahomes is playing, Kansas City wins 42-37. If Mahomes is not playing, Buffalo wins. I didn't think 35-17. I don't think it'll be a very close game if Mahomes doesn't win. Okay, so that wraps up the divisional weekend. That kind of goes over some previews for the AFC and NFC Championship on Sunday. So we have a little bit of Eagles news, not a lot. Most of the news, at least that I've read anyway, over the past week for the Eagles has been all the names that they've been attached to as far as coaching candidates. So I've posted a couple of them. We've talked to some of them, but I'm just going to do as many as I can that I could come up with. So we interviewed Arthur Smith, the Titans offensive coordinator. He has been since hired as the Falcons head coach. We have requested permission to talk to Dennis Allen, the Saints defensive coordinator. Of course, we already know that Deuce Staley is a candidate and has been interviewed. There was an interview scheduled, and I don't know if it occurred, for Gerard Mayo, the Patriots inside linebacker coach. Panthers offensive coordinator Joe Brady was in the mix. Josh McDaniels, the current offensive coordinator for the Patriots, he formerly was the head coach for Denver, I think for 2 years, wasn't very successful. Apparently, Josh McDaniels met with Jeffrey Lurie and possibly other executives. And from what I understand, the meeting lasted upwards of 8 hours. I also read somewhere, and this is all rumors, so who knows what's true. I also read somewhere that that Josh McDaniels was currently assembling a crew. So he was putting together a crack news team. No, he's putting together a a list of people he would like as coordinators if he were to take the head coaching position in Philadelphia. So apparently Josh McDaniels is in the lead. So much that when Brian Daboll, who is on the radar, Bill's offensive coordinator, when I believe he made a comment that that he wasn't interested in the Eagles position and that he thought McDaniels was going to get it anyway. Moving on, the Eagles have requested or interviewed Kellen Moore, the Cowgirls offensive coordinator. Recently, after the Colts loss, Nick Sirianni has become a name that's been brought up. He's the Colts offensive coordinator. Robert Saleh, who was formerly the 49ers defensive coordinator, was interviewed. He has been hired by the Jets as their head coach. So congratulations to him. Todd Bowles, he was on the radar. I don't know if we've had an interview with Todd or not. The Buccaneers defensive coordinator, formerly I believe the head coach of the Jets for a while. So those are the ones that they've requested interviews or had interviews with. Still a bunch of names that are on the radar. Brandon Staley, who is the Rams defensive coordinator, he has been hired as the Chargers head coach. Brian Daboll, who is the Bills offensive coordinator, he's still available. And again, I mentioned I believe he commented that he thought McDaniels was going to get the job. Eric Bieniemy is on the list, the Chiefs offensive coordinator. I haven't heard rumors either way about that. I recently heard about John Fossil, the Cowgirls defensive coordinator. Lincoln Riley, the Oklahoma head coach, although I've heard that he isn't quite interested. I haven't heard. I thought that I heard that he perhaps is not looking to make a move into the NFL. Luke Fickell, the coach of Cincinnati's head coach, and then Ryan Day, Ohio State head coach. So those are all names that were on the radar. No movement, in either direction. Just a bunch of rumors. Another thing that was rumored was that our offensive line coach, Jeff Stoutland, it was rumored that he was returning to college and was possibly going to take a position at Alabama. But apparently he has not. He did not take that job, or he is not taking that job. It hasn't been confirmed if he's going to be with the Eagles next year. It would be nice if he would be. All the complaints and the criticism about our offensive line last year or this year, and I think we had out of 16 games, we had 14 different offensive line combinations. Even so, we were 17th in the league. Our offensive line was ranked 17th in the league. So all of that, and we were middle of the pack. So I consider that a success. And historically, our offensive line, especially over the last few years, has been one of the better ones in the league. And hopefully it will be next year as well with people becoming healthy and all that stuff. So we'll see. I'll keep an eye out for all the most recent head coaching possibilities, the interviews and all that stuff. Eric Wright saying Greg Shupak. I'm not familiar with Greg Shupak. I don't have that guy on my list, so I don't know who he is. But wasn't somebody that I had heard of. So I'll keep an eye out for Greg Shupak. I'll see who he is and where he sits. My opinion, I'd like to say that I am not a fan of Josh McDaniels. I know he's apparently the leading candidate, but I'm not a fan of hiring coaches that were failed head coaches. So that would automatically make him knock him off my list. I'm still leaning towards the pass coordinator from the Chiefs. He's actually not on this list either. I'm a fan of him. But essentially, and Eric White's putting more names up here. Essentially, the Eagles have requested or interviewed almost anybody out there that's looking for to be interviewed for a head coach position. So the list can grow and grow. So Kafka, I believe Kafka is the guy from the Chiefs. I'm a fan of him, and I would, I don't know that Deuce Staley is ready to be a full head coach. I really don't know. Jumping from a running backs coach to head coach, I think is a big jump. Although one of a tight ends coach did just make that jump. But I think, in my opinion, I think Kafka from the pass game coordinator from the Chiefs as head coach and Deuce Staley as offensive coordinator, I think would be a great combination. I think Deuce Staley has been a valuable asset. We should promote him. I just don't know if he's ready to be a head coach. All right. That is the end of the Bald Eagle podcast. Thank you very much for listening, watching. Please follow me, Bald Eagle 4133 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you want to look me up on YouTube to see previous episodes, you have to look up the Bald Eagle podcast. I'm not popular enough yet to come up if you just search the Bald Eagle even, or Bald Eagle. So the Bald Eagle podcast. And of course, I am part of the Notoriety Sports Network, and more specifically NSN Philly. So follow all of Notoriety Sports Network social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and follow NSN on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. Thanks, everybody. Go Eagles.